Musical bridges from the mundane. Poems are a Saturday in the middle of the week. They illuminate belief, inviting new ways to seek. Poems are songs of romance, with ourselves, others, space, place, and time. Hymns of holy language, angelic ditties of the divine. Poems are also prayers that rhyme. So, that was the first poem in Matthew McConaughey's collection, Poems and Prayers. Well, it's sort of the first poem. It's sandwiched in with the introduction. But in any case, it is our first taste of McConaughey's poetic style and ability. The poem communicates a pretty simple sentiment. It's not all bad. I think the metaphor on line 2 is cute. Otherwise, I'm just not sure there's really anything new here, especially since poems about poetry are in pretty high supply. And that critique, nothing new here, kind of applies to the book as a whole. Now, that said, McConaughey's charm is pretty undeniable, and knowing these poems come from him certainly adds something to them. I think I've said this about every celebrity poetry book I've read. I do believe the author is being sincere. But I think a poem ought to be able to stand on its own, regardless of who the author is. And even if an author is sincere, that sincerity alone can't carry a piece, let alone a collection. So, as with many celebrity collections before, I want to look through the poems in this book to see what we can learn from them. What do I see that works in McConaughey's poems, and what do I feel isn't quite there? Hopefully, as we answer those two questions, we can all learn how to read and write poetry more effectively. But before we go on, let me just take a moment to say that as a reader, writer, and YouTuber, I live a pretty sedentary life. So earlier this year, I got myself a standing desk, and it was probably the best thing I received in 2025. As such, you can imagine how pleased I was when FlexiSpot reached out to me last month and said they wanted to sponsor one of my videos. As a longtime standing desk user, let me tell you, the E7 Premium Standing Desk is a thing of beauty. It's super stable, so I can reliably type and write on its surface while leaving basically anything I want on there. I can also raise and lower the thing while leaving everything on top, so if I do want to take a load off, it's no problem. And in case you were worried, this desk can hold up to 440 pounds. I use my desk literally every day along with my mini treadmill, which hasn't created any problem at all because the E7 is just that stable. I can write and do my work while standing and there are zero issues. Oh, and by the way, FlexiSpot has mini treadmills too if you're in the market. This might sound anecdotal, but I really believe using a standing desk has helped my posture and blood flow. What's more, Harvard has pointed to research suggesting standing desks help with blood sugar as well as shoulder and back pain. Check out the link down below or head to www.flexispot.com to check out the E7 options and see the sales going on. You can use my discount code YTE730 for $30 off your FlexiSpot purchase. FlexiSpot also offers discounts for medical staff, students, graduates, teachers, and military personnel. A standing desk would be a great gift this holiday season for any writers in your life. Thanks so much to FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the poetry. This is the poem that caps off the introduction. Like two hands in worship, poems and prayers interlace, dancing with our soul in song. To the music we must face. I write poetry because I believe life rhymes. For more meaning is why I pray. And when the rhyme matters and the meaning's in verse, it's a heaven-sent parlay. Okay, a few things here. I do like the visual of the simile on lines 1 and 2. The idea of poetry and prayer interlacing like fingers is effective. But there are a few things that I think stand out in a bad way. For example, line 6 is phrased very awkwardly, and line 4 is in that same boat, honestly. For more meaning is why I pray, and to the music we must face. It's just not very natural, you know? The phrasing really distracts from the flow and the meaning. Then there's the use of the word parlay. Perhaps I just personally feel that word is too connotatively entwined with gambling in the modern day. Because of that, it feels almost contrary to the subject matter. It's a bit of a tonal mismatch if you ask me, and I have to imagine there was a better rhyme for the word pray. But what do you all think on this one? Here's another poem where I feel the ending just doesn't quite land. Further from Hell. You can call them poems, but what they are is lyrics. Songs about a life of soaring spirits. Where reason rhymes and the light's just right. Where never's done and always might. Where standing's sturdy in the wind's blow. And sights are high without tippy a toe, where we know for certain that we're not sure if prevention's best medicine is the cure. When being on time is when you show, and your soul's account is flush with dough, where looking back don't hurt as much as you thought, and telling the future's as easy as aught, where forgiveness is free to give and to get, we reunite once again with people we've met. When tragedy and triumph are both words worth the giggle, the chains come off and give room to wiggle. When love stories are told in front of our eyes, Believe them all, they are not lies. Where your back is watched while you look ahead. In no hurry, but excited for the day you're dead. Where it's all for nothing and everything is well. In a place called heaven, further from hell. I feel like when you read the word heaven, you already know it's the opposite of hell. Unless the author is explicitly subverting that idea, saying heaven further from hell just sounds automatically redundant. What's more, there are so many lines that simply don't seem to make sense to me. It's one of those instances where lines feel like they're bending to force a rhyme rather than meaning. The most egregious example, in my opinion, is line 4. What is this line actually saying? So we're talking about poems or songs wherein never is done and always might. What does that mean? What form of might are we talking about here? And what does it mean for never to be done and always might? I feel like I'm having a hard time even voicing these questions because they don't even make sense. Am I going crazy? I guess I can understand never's done in the sense that anything can happen in a poem. Never say never and all that. Still, the second half of the phrase does not click for me. I get that the poem has a few paradoxes, like line 7, but even if this is meant to be a paradox, the phrasing remains beyond me. Line 12 is kind of similar, and telling the future's as easy as ought, though I can sort of work out a meaning for that one if you take ought with an O to be a spelling of ought with an A, which archaically means anything at all. On a more positive note, I do like line 6, that one is fun, and sights are high without tippy a toe. Then there's this piece, Shades for the Eclipse. Headin' into town to find a girl named Nikki. They say she's got shades for the eclipse. Naked eye on the sun today will surely cause quite a twitch. Lord, lead me from temptation, with absence of a glitch. It's a blue moon Saturday mornin', and there's treble in my breeze, and since tomorrow's Sunday, good idea to stretch my knees. No one's expectin' me, and nobody minds. No need for laws when you're civil and you're kind. All my appointments are merely suggestions. If I'm unimpressed, I'll make the impressions. Nowhere to climb, 'cause out here's too level. When you can see the bad guys comin', you're less afraid of the devil. This two-way traffic don't lean on yellow lines, and the burrito at the bank's worth $1 for my dimes. Gonna drop off the trash, get rations for my water, write a tune for my wife, a poem for my daughter. Oops, took a quick peek at the sky before I got my glasses. Now I can't see Sure hope this passes. Good thing I got on my GPS, 'cause this driving half-blind is a hell of a test. Taking my time, cruise control doing 80, to see the eclipse, where it's gonna get shady. Best rest while I'm up, sleep on the job later, 'cause when the moon serves the sun, it's time to tip the waiter. I'm heading into town to find a girl named Nikki. They say she's got shades for the eclipse. I wish this one had been more narrative, and that's personal bias shining through. I love narrative poetry, but wouldn't it make so much sense given the way the poem opens? I find myself wishing the poem had been more about the search for Nikki. It seems to me McConaughey really wants to impart wisdom onto the reader, and I'm going to mention that again later. Personally, I think the best way to impart wisdom onto a reader is to really engage their senses, even in poetry. Let the reader experience something. I think a version of this poem that doesn't rhyme might be more effective. The rhymes are a little distracting, and without them, McConaughey would have room to tell the journey as it happened. You'll also notice this note in the corner of the page. McConaughey comments on a lot of his own poems, usually simply explaining the backstory behind them, which I think is neat and captures my interest, especially for someone who isn't a poet by trade. But you can see here that he says all of these details are true, including the cheap burrito he bought. Frankly, I think the burrito alone could make for a fine poem. There's a lot going on here, but we barely get any time with each piece. I could see this being a short story or a series of poems rather than only one singular poem. Still, I wonder what you think, reader. As I said, we'll talk about wisdom more and more throughout our reading here. Let's jump ahead to this poem, Good Man. There's a difference between a good man and a nice guy. A good man stands for certain ideals, and when those beliefs are contested, a good man is not a nice guy. So McConaughey is engaging in some language parsing here, a poet's favorite pastime, as my latest MFA advisor would say. He's comparing the structurally similar nice guy with good man. Those two phrases are practically synonymous, and I don't dislike that as a conceit for a poem. However, while I don't often criticize a poem just because I disagree with the premise, I have to say I do almost feel like there's a slant of toxic masculinity here. The idea that you can't be a nice guy and someone who stands up for ideals, that's plain silly to me. McConaughey also has a note attached to this poem where he talks about his desire in the 90s to no longer be typecast as the rom-com lead. He says it reminded him of when people called him cute as a boy when he really wanted to be called handsome. And let me just say, as a man, that's a relatable sentiment. That would have made for a good poem too. But I don't know, I feel like the context to this poem doesn't really help its image. McConaughey also writes, "The nice guy's easy to be around, but he goes along with everything. A good man's different. He has things he stands for. It's harder to be a good man." And again, I just find myself disagreeing. Perhaps if McConaughey had actually argued that premise in the poem, in the poem's current state, the conclusion is treated sort of as a given. Sometimes parsing language and playing with semantics is more fun when you give yourself more room to do so. I'm reminded of Leah Purpura's First Adventures in Beauty, a mixed media erasure poem that's basically a big lyric essay on the true meaning of beauty. In that book, Purpura is parsing a lot of language, but she does so engagingly in both form and content. I mean, just look at the delivery here. This is so cool, and I absolutely love the slug motif. Our next piece is called Regulations. Listen to yourself, hear yourself, learn yourself and mind. Measure yourself, train yourself, referee yourself in kind. Negotiate yourself, invest yourself, multiply yourself and scale. Administer yourself, accomplish yourself, dare yourself from hell. Own yourself, exchange yourself, pay yourself back. And that's where the poem ends, which is weird, right? Setting the repetition aside, McConaughey was very clearly doing an AAB type rhyme scheme, so why is this poem straight up missing a stanza? It's like at the end of a song, you expect chords to resolve themselves, right? The lack of an end rhyme in a rhyming piece is the poetic equivalent of the unresolved chord. And there's obviously an effectiveness to that. This might seem like a weird example, but I'm reminded of one of the poems from Doki Doki Literature Club. This one is Eagles Can Fly. Monkeys can climb, crickets can leap, horses can race, owls can seek, cheetahs can run, eagles can fly, people can try, but that's about it. The fact that this rhyming poem doesn't end on a rhyme is a clear, intentional, humorous subversion, and it's even a little sad when you think about it, especially in the game's context. It emphasizes the poem's point. People can try, but they cannot ultimately succeed. And this poem is no masterpiece by any means, but it's written by a high schooler in lore, and it's not ultimately the point of the game, so I give it a pass. Another example would be Brian Bilston's poem First Date. I won't read it in full, I actually did that in another video. You can pause and read it if you'd like. As with the DDLC poem, the ending's change in form is a clear, humorous, rather sad subversion. That's what this lack of an end rhyme usually accomplishes in these rhyming pieces. There's apparent cynicism in undermining your own form in tones like the poems I've shown here. And obviously you can play with form like this in non-cynical ways, but I think that's a little less common. So in McConaughey's case, I'm more confused by the lack of an end rhyme because I don't think he's trying to subvert his point here. I think he's being totally sincere and playing this completely straight. But the way the poem ends ironically makes it feel very inconclusive. Let's move on. This next poem is called Dream Team. Trying to get truth to meet honesty, honesty to hang out with Frank, Frank to hook up with Jiminy Cricket, and Jiminy Cricket to marry Desire. And it'd be nice if they all got along for more than a couple of hours. God, I feel caught between trying to make heaven on earth and trying to get to heaven after I leave here. Do we get more heaven on earth by trying to get there? Or do we get more hell on earth so we can? Now, first, let me say, as a formatting note, I'm not even sure if these two stanzas are supposed to be the same poem. They don't seem all that connected, honestly. And there are a lot of instances like that where I see poems that look titleless, and I have to wonder if they're supposed to stand on their own or if they're part of the piece on the last page. It's fine to leave poems without titles, I encourage that sometimes as a matter of fact, but it should be clear when they're meant to stand on their own, separate from the poems on previous or following pages. Anyway, that's not even really the most egregious thing about this poem if you ask me. I feel like there are many instances in the book where I can't track McConaughey's logic. Both the poetry and prose sections can often feel a bit like free association. I don't always see the progression from one line to the next. And maybe that's part of the point since McConaughey talks about abandoning reason in his introduction, but it feels a little untidy and underdeveloped to me, not to mention a bit frustrating as a reader. So our last two lines here, do we get more heaven on earth by trying to get there, or do we get more hell on earth so we can? Like I said, I'm just not sure I follow the logic. How does more hell on earth allow us to get to heaven? Am I even interpreting that line correctly? And I suppose I should say that while I can. My mind is not a steel trap. I am not beyond misinterpreting from time to time. So if you understand what's being said here, please let me know. It feels to me that McConaughey is trying to employ some clever parallelism here, but it doesn't quite land for me. That'll take us into our last poem for this section, American Dreams Lost to Find. The American dream is a promise for the opportunity to at least fail and possibly succeed. Seems like the path to this dream is more undefined now than it's ever been. To those among us who don't believe in it and say it's not real, I say to you, at least America's still trying. That's simply not true in so many other countries. So whether you think it's a dream or an illusion, if nothing else, it's the best nightmare available. Okay, I don't mean to sound like too much of a doomer, nor too mean, but this poem bothers me for a lot of reasons. For one thing, the concluding lines are somewhat interesting, and yet they feel out of sorts with the rest of the poem. McConaughey cuts America a lot of slack here, so calling the American dream a nightmare at the end feels incongruous with the meaning the rest of the poem is trying to make, no? If you want to reach the conclusion that the American dream is a nightmare, I think you'd need to take a different road to get there than what this poem presents. And again, I don't want to criticize a poem just because I disagree with its content. I think poets should be allowed to write about whatever they want, and yet the message here gets on my nerves. I feel like in almost all of these celebrity poetry collections, there's at least one moment that makes the poet feel a little out of touch. Like I said, I don't mean to be too much of a doomer, but to say America is still trying simply doesn't sound accurate in our present day. I do think there are individual Americans who are most certainly trying and trying their absolute hardest, but America itself, as an institution with this government, and granted, maybe McConaughey wrote this one years before currently unfolding events. Still, it doesn't take a genius to see that the system is rigged right now. Okay, forgive me if I've been too harsh. Let's move into some of the poems I actually did like, and why I think they work better than the others we've read so far. Let's start with this untitled piece. Cobra Man Say, if get bit, think like it's small thing, so your heart beats slower, so less venom get to your body, and you live longer. If get bit and think it big thing, your heart beat faster, and you die sooner.
Why waste time? Say lot word when few word do trick.
Okay, first, let me say that I'm not sure what dialect McConaughey is going for here. I showed this poem to my patrons on Discord, and some said it was perhaps meant to sound like a Cajun speaker, given McConaughey's time in Louisiana. Other patrons said it's not meant to capture any real dialect at all. One theory was that the speaker had already been bitten by a cobra and was trying to conserve their words the way they'd conserve their energy. Another one of my patrons said the speaking is meant to imitate a slow heartbeat. I think any one of these suppositions is defendable in a reading of the poem. In any case, the way this poem is written separates it from the other poems in the collection. The other poems generally just sound like McConaughey, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's cool that his voice comes through. Of course, as I've said before on this channel, I do typically love variants in a poetry collection. Setting that aside, though, I appreciate that this poem is using a metaphor instead of trying to impart wisdom explicitly. That makes the piece much more engaging and makes the lesson stick much harder. This is what poetry is about, saying things in ways you can't in prose. This poem is okay, probably my least favorite of my favorites, if you get what I mean, so let's move into the even better ones. Life and Candy Crush. Candy Crush teaches fiscal responsibility, how to save and how to spend, where the hints and tips are helpful until you start to win. Then comes the bad advice, and their suggestions start to lie, because only after you win the prize do they blitz you with offers to buy. It'll cost you the same price to open your piggy bank for only half the gold that was there. But you can start each game with a wheel to spin, just like you're at the fair. You'll find it best to decline the first offer in the barter of any exchange, because a better one will soon follow, and you can win more games. Candy Crush teaches time management, how to make up your own mind in measured time, that if you ask a friend for help, they'll usually be kind. And if they help you once, they'll probably ask you back double, because sometimes in life you can, and do, have to buy your way out of trouble. Admittedly, I felt inclined to roll my eyes at the title, but I ended up enjoying the actual poem a lot more than I anticipated. Much like our last poem, McConaughey is using symbols and something concrete to teach the lesson here. Again, that's much more engaging than pure, undistilled ideas. Sometimes I do get wary of poems that employ pop culture references or brand names just for the fear that they might not always be relevant or timeless. Even if that's the case, this poem is effective for its audience now. Structuring the whole poem around Candy Crush rather than merely slipping a reference in there is a pretty great way to approach a topic that might not be timeless on its face, because you inject the timelessness in it through metaphor, symbolism, and other poetic devices. Also, before we move on, it's so interesting to me that McConaughey can write this poem, one that's pretty clearly about how rigged the system is, but then can also write the poem he did about the American dream. Unless this poem literally is just about Candy Crush and not about anything larger, but I really don't think that's the case. Next up, we actually have a shorter one. People will die in your life who you will know would have lived longer had you been a better friend. So this is hardly perfect. I think the phrasing is slightly awkward, and I do wish there were some showing on top of the telling. Nevertheless, the implications are somewhat interesting. This one actually does provoke some thought from me, both about the author and myself. And that's where I reemphasize that more showing versus telling would have been better here, because I can't help feeling McConaughey is thinking about a specific person with this poem. And I think the piece would have been far more interesting if he'd gone deeper there. I feel like I've said this a lot lately. Remember, good authors don't withhold. Now, for my favorite poem in the book, Deuces. 40 miles south of Petite, looking for a lid to rest my seat. With my stomach in knots, my prostate in a pinch, the clock was ticking. I was grumpy as a Grinch. With the sun now rising just past 6 a.m., found a roadside loo and I went on in. I passed the janitor who was on his way out, which gave me faith and relieved my doubt. See, I consider a porta potty an absolute win, long as the first butt in the morning's mine on the porcelain. So this one is kind of dumb, but I actually love it for that. I wish more poems in the book didn't take themselves too seriously, same as this one. The final rhyme here is also more poignant and precise than other pieces. It feels like an ending. The premise here is also immediately gripping. I do at least partially wish we knew why the speaker's stomach was so upset, but the poem still stands fine without that context. This is another thing I feel like I say a lot. There are millions of poems about love and life and wisdom. But how many poems have I read about using roadside bathrooms? This might be the first one to my recollection. This is yet another reason why authors shouldn't take themselves so seriously. As Steve Almond says in Truth is the Arrow, Mercy is the Bow, you shouldn't ignore the comic impulse. Don't be afraid to look stupid and silly and embarrassing, because it might actually make your work stand out all the more. With that, let's move into some overall thoughts on the work. I might repeat some things I've already touched on here, but I think they're important to reemphasize. As with many celebrity poetry collections, this would make for pretty decent gateway poetry. Like, if you're just looking to get into the form, then sure, I suppose this is a fine place to start. But it's kind of only scratching the surface of what a poem can do and be. McConaughey's rhythm is usually pretty on point. I think in some interviews about the book he said that he often had a tune in his head and wrote the poems within that tune, which is a pretty good way to keep the meter outwardly consistent even if it's not perfect. There are moments where the rhythm clearly slips, but for the most part these poems have a pretty good sound to them. The rhymes can often feel forced, even when the poems aren't bending grammatical convention or verb tense, which they often do. McConaughey also loves his repetition. I've talked about that in so many other videos that I'll keep my comments brief here. I don't hate repetition. It acts as a crutch sometimes, especially among amateur poets who are just learning what devices they can use and how to separate their poems from prose. What's more, a lot of people end up creating the opposite effect they intend when using it, likely trying to create emphasis only to end up making things stale. In the prose section, there are still some poetic elements like alliteration and a rhyme here and there. Kind of fun, kind of playful, but not too standout for me. Speaking of standout, there are repeated uses of the words Rolodex and Autobahn. I've mentioned this before too. You have to be careful about the unique words you use because readers will remember them. These are standout words, but they lose their punch a bit when they pop up more than once. The book is really spiritual. If you're a spiritual person, you might find it interesting whether you agree or disagree with McConaughey. But ultimately, I keep going back to how, it seems to me, McConaughey really wants his poems to come off as wise and informing. Don't get me wrong, poetry is a good place for aphorisms and maxims. However, those adages work best when they feel effortless, or, alternatively, earned through a strong train of thought and/or imagery and other poetic devices. I mentioned this already, but more concrete images would have helped a lot of these pieces. I can't help saying the shots at wisdom here feel kind of forced or given. I want to read one more poem for you, this untitled piece here. Covet nothing but your superior self. Seek transformation over transaction. Individuality over conformity. Recognize your inadequacies, then make one step at a time in the right direction and endure. It will be harder than you think, because your long road has no arrival until you die. In many ways, this feels like the most generic poem in the book. At the same time, it feels somewhat representative of a lot of the pieces. A lot of platitudes and efforts to be sage, which ironically just don't have that much power because they're either cliche or trying too hard. You can disagree with me, of course, this sort of thing is obviously subjective, but I think if you had a friend who was always trying to moralize to you, that would get old fast, and that's kind of how it feels reading this collection. Writing a book of wisdom isn't such a bad idea, but if it feels like a lecture, who's going to want to sit through that? Experiences, images, symbolism. Engaging teachers, speakers, and writers know how to keep an audience listening, and it's not so simple as merely talking at them. Moreover, while I don't mean to disagree with content again, I do feel a touch confused about the introduction to this book. McConaughey correctly identifies that truth is hard to find these days, and lies are hard to parse through, but unless I'm misunderstanding, his conclusion seems to be to rely less on facts and more on belief. And don't get me wrong, I agree we all need to believe in something. In interviews, McConaughey stated that while his belief is in God, he encourages non-theists to put their belief in their children or in the future or anything else, as long as it doesn't harm anyone. And I totally agree with him. We all need to have some hope, otherwise what's the point? But again, belief and truth don't have to be mutually exclusive. I feel like it might be slightly dangerous to tell people to rely less on the facts at a time like this, our present. This collection's list price is $29 according to Amazon, which I guess is just the standard price for celebrity poetry collections now. I don't know. When comparing it against Haley Lou Richardson's collection, another book that was $29, there is definitely a larger volume of poetry, but not so much visual art. In any case, I really don't think $30 is a good price for either value. I mentioned in the Richardson video that because poetry collections can be much quicker than prose, I tend to measure their value based on how many poems stick with me after reading. And in McConaughey's case, I think it'll only be the roadside bathroom poem I look back on in the future. That said, I do applaud Matthew for putting out a poetry book. I'm not sure if I emphasize this point enough, but I really do like seeing celebrities get into poetry because I hope it will get more people at large into poetry. Do I wish celebrities would read, study, and workshop a little more? Yeah, for sure. Even so, I hope this book creates more poetry lovers. McConaughey told CNN how he fell in love with writing through journaling, but it soon became something he wanted to share. Personally, I think that's lovely, and I always love hearing people's experiences of how they got into reading and writing. As with every celebrity whose collection I've reviewed, I hope McConaughey keeps writing, and I hope he reads a diverse pool of poetry too. Before I close up, I do want to leave you all with a recommendation. If you're looking for some spiritual poetry that is highly engaging, I would recommend The Porcine Canticles by David Lee. Lee generally writes in a rural dialect and has a very long-winded, chatty style. I'll read you the first poem of this book and you'll probably see what I mean. Loading a Boar. We were loading a boar, a goddamn mean big son of a bitch, and he jumped out of the pickup 4 times and tore out my stock racks and rooted me in the stomach, and I fell down, and he bit John on the knee, and he thought it was broken, and so did I, and the boar stood over in the far corner of the pen and watched us, and John and I just sat there tired, and Jan laughed and brought us a beer, and I said, "John, it ain't worth it. Nothing's going right, and I'm feeling half dead and haven't wrote a poem in ages, and I'm ready to quit it all." And John said, "Shit, young feller, you ain't got started yet, and the reason's 'cause you trying to do it outside yourself and ain't looking in, and if you want to, by God, write poems, you gotta write poems about what you know and not about the rest, and you can write about pigs and that boar and Jan and you and me and the rest, and there ain't no way you're gonna quit." And we drank beer and smoked, all 3 of us, and finally loaded that mean bastard and drove home and unloaded him, and he bit me again, and I went in the house and got out my paper and pencils and started writing and found out, John, he was right. Once again, that was the first poem from The Porcine Canticles by David Lee. But what do you think? Am I being too hard on McConaughey here? Do you like the poems I showcased? Have you ever read the book? If so, please let me know what you think. And let me know your thoughts on this video too. Please tell me everything. As always, I want to take this time to thank my patrons. I truly could not do this without them. If you want to support the channel and get perks like seeing videos early and access to the community Discord, you can do that for as little as $3 a month. If you want to support the channel in other important ways, doing all the algorithm things helps a lot, like more than you know, seriously. You can also follow me on my socials if you want, but no matter what, keep reading, keep writing, and ultimately keep in mind, this is a rough draft. And for sticking around this long, here's a writing prompt for you. Here are some of the titles of Matthew McConaughey's movies: Mud, Dazed and Confused, Interstellar, Sing, Contact, and How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. I want you to take one of these titles, or a combination, and write a poem using that as your title. The poem can be about the movie, but it doesn't have to be. So, get to writing.